Tonight, healthcare advocates vow to launch a constitutional challenge against a new Ontario long-term care law meant to help free up hospital beds.
This law will tear people apart.
It will equally result in significant psychological and physical harm to these patients.
Hospital patients waiting for a spot in long-term care now face being charged hundreds of dollars a day if they refuse to be transferred to a care home not of their choosing. Advocates calling it discrimination. Plus,
you don't need more land, you need more housing.
A coalition of environmentalists, labor unions, farmers, and housing advocates is slamming the Ontario government's plans to open up sections of the protected Greenbelt for housing development. And
we're just so stoked and excited. We're still on cloud nine and probably will be for a couple more days.
The Toronto Argonauts bring the Grey Cup back to Toronto after defeating the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. We hear from the team. Good evening, I'm Kelda Yoon. It's a controversial new law. Now, as of yesterday, hospitals are required to charge elderly patients $400 a day if they refuse to be transferred to an available long-term care home. Now, the province says the rule is needed to help free up hospital beds, but some healthcare advocates are calling it discrimination based on age. And today, they vowed to launch a constitutional challenge against Bill 7. Lorena Redicott has more.
This, in our view, is a really hideous piece of legislation.
Two organizations, the Ontario Health Coalition and the Advocacy Centre for the Elderly, plan to launch a charter challenge. They're against a new law that allows hospitals to send patients assessed to need long-term care to a home up to 70 kilometres away in southern Ontario, up to 150 kilometres in the north, to a home they didn't choose.
It will equally result in significant psychological and physical harm to these patients, and for some, likely result in premature death, very likely. Again, that violates the rights to security of person and the right to life.
The government says the law is meant to free up space in hospitals to move out patients deemed to need other types of care, not a hospital bed. And today, the health minister says it's already working.
I am hearing from hospital CEOs who are saying on the ground in their hospital, they have seen alternative level of care beds open up. So now we have beds available for acute care patients.
The health ministry says since this came into effect 2 months ago, more than 2,400 patients have accepted a long-term care bed. And the list of people in hospital waiting for long-term care is down by 20%. The advocacy groups say they plan to file this challenge by the end of the month and expect it'll cost around $500,000. Lorena Redicott, CBC News, Toronto.
Ontario's Health Coalition is calling on the province's top doctor to resign after video that surfaced last week showing him unmasked at an indoor event.
You would hope that chief medical officers would model the behavior that we're asking other people to follow. It was sad. When I saw that video, I thought, whoa, he has to resign. I mean, yeah, it is not what we would expect of a chief medical officer of health in this circumstance at all.
The video posted to Toronto Life's Instagram page showed Chief Medical Officer of Health Dr. Kieran Moore without a mask, standing close to other guests as they watch a performance. Now, the video came just days after he strongly recommended masking in indoor public settings, citing pressure to the province's healthcare system. Asked about it today, Ontario's Deputy Premier said masking is a choice, not a mandate.
No, I think that it's consistent with what we've always said, which is personal choice. You make your own determinations depending on where you are. If the space is crowded indoor, if you are looking after vulnerable individuals, that personal choice is really important in Ontario.
Now, interim leaders for Ontario's Liberal and NDP parties are not calling for Moore's resignation. They say he should apologize for failing to wear a mask and use the opportunity to clarify masking guidance ahead of the holiday season. And we're hearing from the Education Minister today about last night's last-minute deal to avoid a strike by education workers that would have closed schools once again.
I think what matters is the outcome, and we delivered a deal with the parties that provides some stability for kids and keeps them in school today. And I think that's something we should all celebrate.
Meanwhile, CUPE's Laura Walton says she's not happy with the deal, saying it was no different than what the government offered last week. But she says the union was told the government wasn't willing to budge any further. Meanwhile, parents we spoke to today say they are relieved another walkout was averted.
I hope they got what they need in their tentative agreement, and if not, they should go back to the negotiating table.
I'm pretty excited that the kids are back in school today. We'll have to see what the CUPE membership thinks about this deal. It doesn't sound like much change since the last time, but I'm very grateful to the union that they were able to get, their staff back into our schools and our kids back into schools today.
Now it's over to those education workers. The deal is expected to be put to a vote by CUPE members later this week, with results expected by the weekend. Toronto police have identified the victim of a fatal shooting on Sunday near a residential building in Etobicoke as 19-year-old Jaheim Tucker. Now, officers were called to Finch Avenue West and Humberline Drive shortly before 6 p.m. Police say they found a man with life-threatening injuries. Paramedics performed life-saving measures, but the victim died at the scene. No suspect information has yet been released. All right, let's go to Colette Kennedy now with a first look at your forecast. And Colette, really nice to see some sunshine out earlier today, and it also felt a bit warmer despite those winds.
Yeah, it really did feel warmer, and it's kind of interesting when we look at the daytime highs. It's that, oh gosh, this seems so mild. Actually, it's just kind of back to seasonal, but when you compare it to the weekend and all the snowfall and last week, but then yes, we also had to contend with those very strong wind gusts, some of those gusts 70, 80 kilometers an hour, especially from Hamilton around to the Niagara region. But Toronto up to 7 today, a normal high is 6 for this time of year. And just looking ahead tonight, with those winds easing in the overnight hours, that makes it so that even though we're behind a cold front now and some cooler air is moving in, and we go down to -5, the thing is, won't be too bad with the wind chill factor because we won't have to knock too much more off since the winds won't be as strong. Now, I expect us to start off the day with quite a bit of sunshine tomorrow, kind of the opposite for southwestern Ontario. You'll have cloud and then clearing, but for the GTA, we'll see increasing cloudiness as we do go into the afternoon hours. Some more sun to begin, and then it changes a bit. -5 though tonight, just feeling like -7, and tomorrow a high of 4 degrees. Gelda.
Thanks so much, Colette. It's the start of a big week of testimony at the inquiry into the federal government's use of the Emergencies Act. Today, it heard from the top official at Canada's spy agency. The head of CSIS says he recommended the government invoke the legislation during the convoy protests last winter. Marina von Stackelberg reports.
The record, please state your full name.
The head of the Canadian Security Intelligence Service, also known as CSIS, says he felt the Emergencies Act was required. And he says he told the Prime Minister that directly. The advice came the day before the government would bring in the never-before-used legislation. It gave sweeping powers to authorities to shut down protests. It was February 13th. Downtown Ottawa had been occupied by convoy protesters for 3 weeks. Borders to the United States remained blockaded. The Prime Minister held a special meeting of cabinet and experts. At the end of the meeting, he asked CSIS Director David Vigneault what he thought.
He advised the Prime Minister of his belief that it was indeed required to invoke the Act. And again, you remember saying that during the closed session?
Yes.
To invoke the Emergencies Act, the government must believe there is a threat to Canada's security, one so serious it's a national emergency. It needs to endanger the lives, health, or safety of Canadians, and must be so major local authorities can't deal with it. The inquiry has repeatedly heard evidence that earlier on, the CSIS director did not think the convoy posed a threat to national security based on its own criteria. But Vigneault testified he then learned the Emergencies Act used a broader definition of a threat. So that night he told the Prime Minister, based on what he was seeing across the country, the bar was met to invoke the Act.
We know the Act fairly well, of CSIS Act. I was not familiar with the details of the Emergencies Act.
Last week, 2 senior government officials, the clerk of the Privy Council and a top security advisor, both testified they also recommended the government use the Act. And now cabinet ministers have begun to explain why they decided to invoke it.
I don't want to minimize what was going on in Ottawa by any stretch of the imagination, but right across the country, particularly as it pertains to critical infrastructure, for me, elevated the situation to a national emergency.
This is the most anticipated week of the inquiry. The public will finally hear from those who ultimately made the decision to invoke the act. That includes top-ranking cabinet ministers and the Prime Minister himself. He's set to testify on Friday. Marina von Stackelberg, CBC News, Ottawa.
The City of Toronto is hosting a job fair for refugees and new Canadians.
It's a little bit difficult to get something professional, something in your field that you'd love to grow with. So that's why I'm very happy that Jumpstart came up with this opportunity. They helped us, in connecting us with these amazing companies.
The Toronto Refugee Hiring Event is a free event that provides access to a range of job opportunities. This year's event includes employers from banks and major retailers. The candidates had opportunities to get coaching and on-the-spot interviews. Welcome back. The $80 million renovation of Toronto's second busiest runway is now complete. Federal Transport Minister Omar Alghabra attended the reopening ceremony at Pearson Airport today.
The importance of Canada's airports to our country's economy and in supporting the social well-being of Canadians cannot be overstated. Projects like this are helping the aviation sector recover and will support safe airport operations for residents and workers in the GTAA for years to come.
The project began this spring and was completed within the deadline. The runway was in need for a makeover after years of wear and tear from weather and plane landings. Authorities say the repair work did not contribute to delays experienced at the airport earlier this year. The Premier's plan to develop sections of the Greenbelt has been drawing criticism from many environmentalists, and today those voices are being backed by a coalition including labor unions, housing advocates, and farmers. They argue it will be expensive and wasteful. The government, though, maintaining it's needed for the housing crisis. Alice Chiasson has more.
People want to keep the Greenbelt as it is, and there is a concerted effort to keep the Greenbelt issue in the news. As you'll recall, the government intends to remove 7,400 acres from the Greenbelt and build houses on that land. To make up for it, the province would add around 2,000 acres over here. Environmentalists argue this land isn't nearly as environmentally significant as what's over here, which includes important watersheds. The government says it's a solution to the housing crisis. The ex-chair of the Greenbelt Council says
it will begin the unraveling of the Greenbelt.
Today, a coalition of the Greenbelt Council, along with farmers, labor unions, housing advocates, and more, penned a joint statement condemning the proposal and pointing out
you don't need more land, you need more housing. One doesn't mean the other because you can intensify in the areas you're already in.
The member for University Road.
Today, the NDP challenged the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing with the Greenbelt Coalition statement in hand.
Experts are telling you it won't make housing affordable.
Exactly. To which Minister Steve Clark reduces all the criticism to,
wait a minute, Speaker.
Official opposition come to order.
Listen, if you listen really closely, Speaker, you can hear the sound of NIMBYism.
The idea that we didn't have the land already to build, we didn't have the capacity, or that we needed to accelerate all these extreme approvals, or that we needed to do it by removing any vestige of local democracy is, it's just nonsense.
And as the opposition alleges, greed. As CBC News revealed, several developers started purchasing the Greenbelt land when Doug Ford was elected in 2018. They stand to benefit big. And to wrap up today's battle of the joint statements, the Ontario Builders Association, Building Industry and Land Development Association say in their defense, quote, the lands will be subject to strict timelines for building to commence, which will enable the timely addition of desperately needed additional supply. Public consultations continue until December 5th. Alice Chiasson, CBC News, Toronto.
A group of former Toronto mayors is urging John Tory to reject a proposed expansion of the strong mayor powers given to him by the province. Art Eggleton, John Sewell, David Crombie, Barbara Hall and David Miller are calling the bill an attack on the city's democracy. Municipal Affairs reporter Sean Jeffords breaks it down.
The mayors want Tory to drop a request he made of the province, what he calls a proactive veto when it comes to issues related to housing, transit and infrastructure. But the mayors, including David Crombie, say the change erodes Toronto's democracy and are outraged that it's been proposed.
If there's one rule that people know about in the democratic process in government is boring for a lot of people. But they do understand in their daily lives that majority rules. If somehow the minority rules, you got a problem. This is a government that is so arrogant now that it thinks it can switch on and off that whether they want to have majority or minority.
The Ford government says the powers are needed so that mayors can overcome NIMBYism, restrictive rules that have contributed to the housing supply crisis, they say. But the former mayors are not convinced, and Crombie says the expanded powers weren't explained to voters during the municipal election this fall.
There's always a great need for more reform and better reform in government processes. There's no doubt about it, because things change. And so there always needs to be reform. But what they've done is, quite frankly, in a very deceitful way. They've taken the need for reform and turned it into a crisis, and they use that to push you around.
A spokesperson from his office says the mayor doesn't see the powers changing his approach. He plans to build a consensus with council to pass his agenda, and Tory himself has repeatedly said he plans to use the powers very rarely.
And you are looking at a live shot of the Toronto skyline. Mainly clear tonight, but there were a few cloudy periods. It will be mainly clear overnight and quite a bit warmer than the past few nights. Currently, we are sitting at 4 degrees in the city. Let's go back to Colette now for a more detailed look at your forecast. And Colette, temperatures looking more seasonal this week.
Yeah, that's exactly it. We have a week now where temperatures are above freezing, back closer to normal. But with the snowfall, that does mean melt. And with some colder air just tonight behind this cold front, we could be seeing some areas freezing up, sidewalks and some of the side roads or driveways. So just be careful tomorrow morning because of the cooler air coming in tonight. But at least those winds dropping back, a few flurries possible, but more so kind of to the north of us. Highs near seasonal, which feels mild compared to last week and the weekend. But by the end of the week, we're not talking about snowstorms. We're talking about rain showers as we stick with those daytime highs anyway above seasonal. And even our overnight lows after tonight, okay, maybe tonight, tomorrow night, are generally going to be around freezing or above. We'll see in the 5-day forecast, and I'll show that to you. But just looking at tonight, we're really going to be seeing kind of some clearing tomorrow in southwestern Ontario, but increasing cloudiness here around the Golden Horseshoe and the North Shore of Lake Ontario and stretching into eastern Ontario. If you're kind of on the cusp just a little further west, you'll keep more of that sunshine through the day. As we go into Wednesday, looking at some pretty quiet conditions. A few flurries are possible tonight, but really into Wednesday, we get into quite a bit of sunshine. And with a milder temperature and lighter winds, it's going to be a nice feel to that day midweek. Tonight, it is a little bit cool with these lows of -6 to -7. Winds are down to -6 for you. And around the GTA and all around the Golden Horseshoe, -2 St. Catharines. Compare that to -7 in Oshawa. So we do have a range. We'll see a range too tomorrow with those daytime highs. For Pearson, I'm taking us to 4 degrees. Wednesday, you see more sun. Again, tomorrow in the morning, it'll be there at 5 degrees. And Thursday, 7. At the end of the week, we're keeping those daytime highs, but we bring in some of that liquid precipitation coming our way, Kelda.
All right, thanks so much, Colette. One of the most prized possessions in football is back in Toronto, touching down tonight at Pearson Airport. Our Toronto Argonauts won the 109th Grey Cup last night, beating the Winnipeg Blue Bombers 24-23. Linebacker Enoch Muamba was named Grey Cup MVP, and he's still beaming.
I don't feel like I've processed everything yet, and so to be able to be in this position is such a blessing. And, at some point, that's what I'll kind of start saying as well. But for now, man, I just want to soak everything in.
Muamba celebrating this win with his daughter. The Argos were the underdogs, with Winnipeg heavily favored to win. Now, last night's win gives the Argos their 18th Grey Cup in history and their first since 2017. The city will celebrate the Argos with a championship rally on Thursday. Finally tonight, the FIFA World Cup kicked off yesterday in Qatar with 32 nations vying for the biggest prize in soccer. Here in the city, bars opened early this morning for the England versus Iran game, with alcohol available as early as 7 a.m. Greg Ross spoke to those early risers.
The Queen and Beaver British pub was packed at 7:30 this morning, with fans coming to watch England face Iran in World Cup action. The province has temporarily extended the hours in which bars and restaurants can serve alcohol during the tournament because of the 8-hour time difference in Qatar. Many soccer fans are taking advantage.
There's quite a few people up there having a pint, which does surprise me a little bit this early in the morning, but they're English and it goes hand in hand with watching football.
And to go with the beer, a little breakfast.
We've got bacon butties we're doing, bacon and egg sandwiches.
Some even starting their workday in the bar.
I'm supporting my team members here. They are supporting the England team, so I'm here supporting them, and we are having a working breakfast together. Seeing the joy that it brings, when they just scored the goal, it felt like the roof came down. So it's so much more fun watching it together, as a group.
Toronto's Little Italy would normally be filled with blue Italian soccer jerseys during the World Cup, but with Italy not qualifying this time around, many fans will be wearing red instead.
We have our homeland, Canada, right? So Wednesday, their first game after, 36 years not being in the World Cup.
Rocco Mastrangelo is the owner of Cafe Diplomatico in Little Italy. With Canada playing in the World Cup for the first time since 1986, he says they have big plans for all of their games.
Right now, we're fully booked inside and on a regular patio, but we are closing the street on Clinton Street. We're pitching a massive tent, enclosed with heat, stage, video wall, and we actually have live bands starting at noon.
Canadian fans will get their first chance to watch together on Wednesday when Canada faces Belgium at 2 p.m. our time. Greg Ross, CBC News, Toronto.
And that's our show for you tonight. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you back here tomorrow night at 11. Have a great night, everyone.